when one unexpected decision hits the system, the whole facade of power cracks open. Our one decision started a public meltdown, and suddenly, even the so-called president in this story had to admit that a single focused mind could shake the foundation of an entire fictional nation. People in power love to pretend they control the narrative, but the moment someone they underestimated refuses to play along, their illusion of stability collapses. This meltdown isn't chaos. It's exposure. It's the moment the masks fall off and the powerful realize an ordinary mind, sharp, relentless, and impossible to manipulate, is more dangerous than any political scandal they fear. Before we dive into this ruthless message, pause this video and do 3 things. Hit that like button, subscribe so we can blast past 50,000 subscribers, and drop a comment with the number 11. That tells me you're locked in and not just another passerby. And if you're really built for this, you'll watch until the end. Because the ones who can handle the truth don't click away. They lean in. The moment you made that decision, quietly, without fanfare, the entire room of power reacted as if someone had pulled oxygen from the air. These were people who believed they had rehearsed every scenario, predicted every threat, and manipulated every outcome. But they never expected clarity from someone who was supposed to remain silent. It wasn't rebellion. It wasn't aggression. It was simply truth, unfiltered and unafraid. And it hit harder than any speech a leader had ever delivered. Behind closed doors, you could practically hear the tension crack like thin ice beneath heavy footsteps. Advisors whispered, officials paced, analysts scrambled to explain the unexplainable. They had prepared for opposition, but not for authenticity. They had armored themselves against enemies, but not against someone who refused to follow their script. Your decision didn't merely disrupt their plans, it exposed how fragile and overconfident those plans had always been. And in that moment, the room of power wasn't a fortress anymore. It was a stage with broken lights, a place where their practiced composure slipped into panic. They realized that real authority doesn't crumble when challenged by force. It collapses when confronted with a voice they never thought would matter. Your choice didn't just shake the room, it reminded them that the people they underestimate often hold the strongest leverage of all. From the beginning, they built systems designed to predict behavior, charts, models, psychological analysis, endless files documenting every potential threat. They assumed human beings were patterns to be controlled, variables to be managed. Yet in all their complexity, they never accounted for you, one mind willing to think beyond the lines they drew. You were the unexpected factor that statistics could not contain. To them, you weren't supposed to matter. You were supposed to obey, blend in, nod politely, and move along with the crowd. But an independent mind, once awakened, becomes a force of nature. It questions, observes, and refuses to settle for half-truths. They underestimated the quiet kind of strength, the kind that doesn't shout but simply sees. And seeing, really seeing, is more dangerous to a corrupt system than any protest. When you acted, it wasn't rage or rebellion guiding you. It was clarity, a kind of clarity they've spent decades trying to smother under misinformation and noise. Your one decision, born from a mind they never planned for, revealed the cracks they tried to hide. And once those cracks showed, the illusion of control started to crumble with remarkable speed. Powerful people hate surprises. They fear the unpredictable more than failure, because unpredictability exposes who they really are beneath the polished speeches and controlled expressions. And when you acted, they panicked, not because of what you did, but because your choice forced reality into a room that survives on illusion. In that panic, their masks slipped. Their carefully rehearsed confidence fractured. They spoke too quickly, contradicted themselves, snapped at their own allies, truth spilled out in ways they never intended. The truth that their authority was a performance, not a strength. The truth that they had no plan for honesty, only strategy for control. Your action didn't reveal anything new. It simply stripped away what was already hollow, and the world saw it. Even those who once admired them noticed the shift, the trembling hands, the defensive tone, the fear beneath their polished smiles. Panic is loud, and when leaders panic, truth becomes impossible to hide. Your clarity forced them into the light, and once exposed, they couldn't retreat into the shadows again. The news didn't break slowly. It exploded. Every outlet, every commentator, every podium echoed the same disbelief. How could one person create such a ripple in a system supposedly built to withstand anything? But the meltdown wasn't about your action. It was about their realization that their authority wasn't as stable as they pretended. Their reactions were scattered, desperate. Some officials blamed circumstances, others blamed each other. A few even blamed you, hoping to redirect attention away from the cracks now appearing for everyone to see. But the public wasn't fooled. They watched leaders unravel over something that should have been simple. And in that unraveling, people finally understood how much fear existed behind government doors. It became the meltdown heard across the nation, not because it was chaotic, but because it was revealing. It showed that the people in charge had built their power on sand, not stone. And your one choice had swept the surface clean, letting the whole world see the truth beneath their carefully crafted image. Control is a fragile thing, something leaders cling to with both hands, pretending it's unshakable. But real control is a myth, held together by perception more than strength. When you stepped out of line, not with rebellion, but with truth, the illusion shattered. Suddenly, everyone saw that the authority they worshipped was nothing more than a script repeated often enough to seem real. They tried to regain it. They scrambled for statements, explanations, and last-minute strategies to look unfazed. But the more they tried to control the narrative, the more obvious it became that they had lost it. You cannot regain what was never real to begin with. They had built a kingdom of mirrors, and your decision was the single candle that revealed the trick. And as the illusion dissolved, people began to question everything. If one ordinary person could expose so much, what else were they hiding? What other truths had been wrapped in layers of deception? You weren't the villain in their story. You were the spark that lit 1,000 new questions. He would never admit it. Leaders never do. But his greatest fear wasn't foreign threats or political opponents. It was you. Not you as a person, but you as an idea. The idea that an ordinary citizen, untrained in their games, could refuse to be manipulated. That terrifies those in power because it breaks their oldest strategy, control through predictability. Behind his calm facade, he watched you with unease. Not because you were dangerous, but because you were uncontrollable. Systems of power rely on compliance, not capability. And you proved that someone capable of independent thought can disrupt their carefully arranged chessboard in seconds. His fear wasn't that you acted. It was that others might follow your example, that millions of minds might realize they are not powerless spectators, but active participants in shaping truth. You didn't threaten the nation. You threatened the narrative. And for a leader built on narratives, that is the most frightening threat of all. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't a speech that shook the earth. It was a single, precise decision, one act of clarity in a world trained to accept confusion. And that single choice exposed the system more effectively than any scandal ever could. The system didn't crumble because it was challenged. It crumbled because it was weak. Your choice acted as a spotlight, revealing flaws that had been hiding in plain sight. Suddenly, people saw the inconsistencies, the contradictions, the layers of fear beneath every policy. What leaders couldn't destroy with secrecy, you exposed with honesty. And that exposure spread like a spark hitting dry grass. Your clarity ignited conversations, doubts, realizations. The system wasn't threatened by rebellion, it was threatened by awareness. And awareness, once awakened, cannot be put back to sleep. Obedience is the currency of power. As long as people comply, the system thrives. But you were the anomaly, the mind that refused to obey simply because obedience was expected. You questioned, you noticed, you refused to silence that inner voice that said, "This isn't right." What frightened them wasn't that you defied orders, it was that you did so calmly, logically, without anger or chaos. A peaceful refusal speaks louder than 1,000 protests. It shows that your decision wasn't emotional, it was thoughtful. And thoughtful resistance is something systems of control cannot tolerate. Your refusal wasn't an act of disobedience, it was an act of freedom. And freedom, in its purest form, disrupts everything. People in power rely heavily on one unspoken agreement, that ordinary people will continue pretending everything is fine, pretending not to notice lies, pretending to trust authority, pretending the system is stable. But when you stopped pretending, the cracks in their foundation became impossible to hide. Those cracks had always been there, hidden under polished speeches and staged confidence. But your clarity forced the truth into daylight. And once ordinary people see reality for what it is, they stop playing along. That's the moment power begins to crumble, not from force, but from exposure. You didn't break the system. You simply stopped pretending it was unbreakable, and that alone was enough to shake its core. They will rewrite the story. They will claim the disruption was caused by external factors, political enemies, economic shifts, anything but the truth. But the reality is simple. Your defiance was the trigger. Not because it was loud, but because it was undeniable. Defiance in its quietest form is the most powerful. It shows that control exists only when people accept it. And you didn't. You stood your ground, not as a rebel, but as a human being, unwilling to distort truth for the comfort of those above you. Your defiance wasn't meant to start a fire, but it did. And once the first spark caught, their entire narrative began to collapse. Confidence is a performance, and leaders rehearse it meticulously. But on the day you acted, their performance failed. Their voices cracked. Their posture changed. Their eyes, once unshakably steady, darted around the room, searching for answers no one had. Your clarity dismantled their illusion of control, not because it was powerful, but because it was undeniable. When truth enters a room full of lies, it doesn't have to shout. It simply exists, and existence alone becomes the collapse. That day will be remembered not for what you did, but for how they reacted. Their fear said more than your decision ever could. Some called your action rebellious. Others claimed it was an attack on the nation. But you knew the truth. You didn't challenge the nation. You challenged the story they were telling about the nation, a story built on selective truths, exaggerated victories, and carefully curated illusions. Narratives are powerful, but they are also fragile. When someone exposes the gaps, the contradictions, the missing pieces, the story collapses. And once it collapses, the truth can finally breathe. You weren't fighting the country. You were fighting the lie. And that distinction matters more than they want anyone to realize. They were accustomed to power speaking the loudest. To them, authority equaled volume. But your voice, though quieter, carried something theirs didn't: authenticity. And authenticity resonates deeper than any microphone or podium. People listened. They recognized themselves in your honesty, in your courage, your refusal to bow to manipulation. And suddenly, the strongest voice wasn't the one giving orders from the top, but the one speaking truth from below. This terrified them, because if the strongest voice doesn't come from power, then power becomes irrelevant, and no institution survives irrelevance. They prepared for scandals, political rivals, foreign threats, everything except someone who refused to be controlled. So, when you acted, the fallout spread faster than they could contain. It wasn't chaos, it was clarity. And clarity spreads like wildfire. People began questioning, listening, seeing. The narrative they fought so hard to protect unraveled thread by thread, and they couldn't blame anyone but themselves, because the truth was their weakness, not your action. The fallout wasn't destruction, it was awakening. And awakened people are the last thing any fragile power structure wants. Institutions rely on size, structure, hierarchy, but one mind, focused, steady, and unmanipulated, can outrun all of it. Your clarity moved faster than their bureaucracy. Your honesty cut deeper than their rehearsed lines. Your refusal to be controlled tore through layers of deception built over decades. They underestimated the power of an awakened mind. They believed influence came from titles and authority. But real power comes from awareness, from seeing the truth and refusing to look away. In the end, you didn't defeat the institution. You simply outran it. And in doing so, you proved something they never wanted the world to know. That one clear mind is stronger than 1,000 controlled ones. Fear is the language of power, and they expected you to speak it fluently. They had seen thousands fold under the weight of authority, crumble under pressure, and retreat the moment the room turned cold. But when you stepped forward without trembling, something shifted. They weren't prepared for a person who looked power in the eye and didn't blink. In that moment, they understood you weren't another silent bystander. You were someone who had nothing to hide, nothing to lose, and nothing to fear. Your calmness rattled them more than anger ever could. Anger can be dismissed as passion, hysteria, or impulsiveness. But unwavering calm exposes the truth. You're thinking clearly. You're aware. You're impossible to manipulate. Their entire strategy relied on intimidation. Yet you stood there as if their threats were nothing more than background noise. And for the first time, they saw someone who understood their tactics and refused to dance to their rhythm. The moment they realized you weren't, moment they realized they had no real power over you. Fear is the leash of authority, and yours had snapped. That frightened them more than anything you could have said, because a fearless mind becomes unpredictable, uncontrollable, and unstoppable. Confidence built on illusion is fragile, and yours was the gust of wind that turned it to dust. When you made that unexpected choice, their arrogance evaporated. They had walked the halls believing they were invincible, untouchable, protected by systems designed to shield them. But your decision showed them that protection is only as strong as people's willingness to believe in it. They tried to act unaffected, but you saw the truth in their eyes. The flicker of doubt, the flash of fear, the sudden realization that they were not in control anymore. Confidence turns to dust the moment truth enters the room, because truth doesn't negotiate. It doesn't bow. It doesn't ask for permission. And your choice forced them to confront a reality they had avoided for years. What you did wasn't a blow to their system. It was a blow to their ego. And ego, once cracked, crumbles quickly. You didn't shatter their confidence with force. You shattered it by showing how fragile it always was. Empires don't fall because of armies. They fall because of truth. And your voice, steady and unshaken, carried a truth their empire couldn't survive. Their world relied on silence, on people accepting the script without question. But the moment your voice broke through that silence, their structure began to tremble. You didn't scream. You didn't accuse. You simply spoke with a clarity they couldn't refute. Lies require darkness to survive, and your voice turned on the lights. Suddenly, the shiny walls didn't look so perfect. The polished speeches didn't sound so believable. The audience began to see the cracks that had been there all along. One voice, yours, dismantled what they spent years constructing, not through force, but through truth. And truth, once spoken aloud, spreads faster than any illusion. Questions are more dangerous than accusations, because questions demand honesty. And the question you asked, simple, direct, unshakable, cut through their rehearsed lines like a blade. They had answers for everything except the truth, and that terrified them. Your question exposed their weakness, not because it was complicated, but because it targeted the very foundation they hoped no one would examine. They hesitated, stumbled, looked to their advisors, searching desperately for a response that wouldn't reveal everything they had hidden. But silence was their only answer, and silence speaks louder than denial. In that moment, everyone watching understood the truth. If those in power cannot answer simple questions, then their authority is built on something dangerously fragile. And you were the one who revealed it. Your words were not thunderous, yet they struck like lightning. Their empire, polished on the outside, rotting on the inside, trembled under the weight of your truth. They had fortified their world with layers of deception, but your voice bypassed every barrier and reached the heart of their power. They weren't scared because you were loud. They were scared because you were right in a way they couldn't dismiss, spin, or distort. Empires built on manipulation cannot withstand a single moment of authenticity, and your authenticity destroyed their illusion of stability. The second you spoke, the room changed, the air shifted, the eyes watching you widened, recognizing that the balance of power had tilted, and it had tilted toward you. They spent years burying that truth under paperwork, rhetoric, and carefully constructed narratives. They believed it would stay hidden forever. But truth doesn't die. It waits. And you were the one who reached for it, pulled it from the dirt, and held it up for everyone to see. You didn't dig with anger. You dug with understanding. You saw patterns where others saw confusion. You saw inconsistencies where others saw authority. And your mind pieced together what they thought was buried too deep to ever resurface. When you unearthed it, the entire system froze, because once truth is exposed, it cannot be buried again. And they knew it. Silence unnerves the powerful more than shouting ever will, and your silence, intentional, heavy, controlled, became a weapon they didn't know how to fight. You didn't rush to explain yourself, defend yourself, or apologize. You let the truth breathe, and that terrified them. In silence, their own fears grew louder. They couldn't predict what you would say next, because you said nothing. They couldn't manipulate your reaction, because you gave none. Silence turned the spotlight onto them, exposing their uncertainty, their guilt, their desperation. Your silence cut deeper than any accusation because it forced them to confront themselves, and they hated what they saw. Storms are powerful because they arrive without asking, and your clarity, sharp, undeniable, unmovable, hit with the force of a storm. They weren't prepared for someone who could see through their illusions so effortlessly. They expected confusion, not precision, blind obedience, not conscious awareness. Clarity is dangerous to the powerful, because clarity cannot be controlled. It questions everything. It sees beyond the surface. It exposes manipulation. And your clarity swept through their system like a fierce wind, revealing everything they hoped to keep hidden. They built their world on clouds, and your storm cleared the sky. Predictability is the lifeline of power. They observe patterns, behaviors, reactions, and use them to maintain control. But you were the one variable they could not calculate. Every move you made contradicted their expectations. Every decision disrupted their predictions. You didn't break rules out of rebellion. You simply saw through them. You didn't act out of fear. You acted out of truth. And truth is unpredictable. It moves with purpose, not permission. The system had never faced someone who couldn't be influenced, pressured, or silenced. On that day, they realized something terrifying. Their system wasn't built to handle independent minds. They underestimated you because you looked ordinary. No title, no rank, no official power. But ordinary minds hold extraordinary strength when they start asking the right questions. And your questions exposed weaknesses they had spent decades disguising. You reminded them that power doesn't belong to those with the highest office. It belongs to those with the clearest vision. When you revealed their flaws, it wasn't with fanfare or drama. It was with simple truth, the kind that anyone could understand. And that's what scared them most. If one ordinary person could see through them, millions more could too. They had scripts prepared for every scenario except yours. One sentence, spoken with honesty, shattered their rehearsed confidence. You didn't attack them. You didn't accuse them. You simply stated something true, something obvious, something they never wanted said aloud. Their reaction was immediate. They stumbled, paused, exchanged panicked glances. The script fell apart because truth breaks the rhythm of lies. And once their performance faltered, everyone watching realized the show had always been an illusion. Your sentence didn't just disrupt them, it exposed them. Control relies on compliance. And you, calmly and without aggression, refused to bow. You stood your ground with a dignity that didn't need explanation. They tried intimidation, persuasion, manipulation. None of it worked. You remained steady, and your steadiness cracked their authority. When someone refuses to bow, the illusion of power collapses. Because power isn't real unless people acknowledge it. You withdrew your acknowledgement, and with that, their control began to crumble like old stone. Your strength wasn't loud. It was quiet, unbreakable, and unforgettable. Authority can overpower lies, anger, and fear, but it cannot overpower honesty. And when your honesty confronted their authority, the imbalance became obvious. They had position. You had truth. And truth is the one thing authority cannot defeat. Your honesty disarmed them. Every tactic they used slid off you because you had nothing to hide, nothing to gain, nothing to fear. Meanwhile, their authority looked weaker with every passing second, exposed as hollow without integrity to support it. Honesty won that day.